Hi, I'm Maggie.
And I'm Marin, and you're listening to
Tell Me I'm Sorry,
a podcast where we deconstruct and muse on the depictions of girlhood in film, literature, and other media.
A feminist celebration of pop culture, the audacity of youth, and the ways we grow away from and into our bodies, beliefs, and dreams for ourselves and each other.
And today we are discussing
Support the Girls.
Directed by Andrew Bujalski, who is a pretty prominent indie director. Some of his previous movies include Funny Haha, Mutual Appreciation, and the film Results, which I have seen. A weird movie.
I have not seen
But I also watched it kind of in a fugue state when I had COVID and mono at the exact same time and was just barreling through movies to distract myself from the fact that I sort of wanted to die. This movie was also written by Andrew Bujalski, released August 24, 2018. And as for poster tagline, we don't have one this week. Keeping in line with our previous movies, previous indie art house adjacent movies that don't have poster taglines.
Yeah. I wonder if the one I picked has one for this week.
No tagline, but Maggie, if I Googled this movie, Google would produce a logline trying to convince me to watch this movie. And what would Google tell me?
Ah, yes. Google would say, Lisa is a general manager of Double Whammies, a sports bar that features skimpily dressed waitresses. Always nurturing and protective of her staff, she soon faces one trying day that tests her optimism at every turn. In general, I hate the word skimpily.
That's what I expected. Before we started recording, I told Maggie I thought she would take issue with some wording in the logline.
I hate the word skimpily. And because the word nurturing is followed by the usage of a word like skimpily, I also do not like the word nurturing. Feels particularly gendered.
Yeah, to me the word skimpy feels ethically loaded, or maybe morally loaded is a better term, in the sense that when we say someone is dressed skimpily, there's this expectation that you're passing a moral judgment on them.
Oh, yeah. It's a value judgment.
Right.
For sure.
Yes, that's perfect phrasing. So I raised my eyebrow at that, and I'm glad to know that I wasn't alone.
Not the worst tagline I've seen.
No,
But
still not great.
bad.
For a brief synopsis of the film, for a refresher on everything that happens, or to catch you up if you haven't watched the film, which I would recommend it. I don't know Maggie's opinion yet on the movie, but she will give it soon. Okay, this film takes place mostly over the course of a single workday. We follow Lisa, who is played by Regina Hall, who is the general manager of a local restaurant. The film is set in Texas. A restaurant called Double Whammies, which is a Hooters-type sports bar where the branding of the restaurant is that the waitresses wear low-cut shirts and very short shorts, predominantly for the gaze of male customers. And when we first meet Lisa, she is sitting in her car before her shift starts, crying. We don't know why she's crying, but one of the other waitresses named Macy, who is played by Haley Lou Richardson, sees Lisa, greets her with a hug, and from there we witness the bullshit that Lisa and these waitresses have to deal with. We witness how much Lisa cares about the staff she manages, and we witness all of their camaraderie with each other. Another waitress named Danielle, who is played by Shayna McHale, who I learned originally came to fame as a rapper, and her stage name is Jungle Pussy. So that's pretty cool. Danielle shows up to her shift with her young son, who is homesick from school, and Lisa helps recruit another waitress who isn't working that day to babysit him. When a waitress tells Lisa that a customer has insulted her appearance, Lisa confronts the customer, tells him that he's no longer welcome in the restaurant. The cable is out, and Lisa is trying to get it fixed before a big UFC fight that night. We learn that before the movie started, Lisa bailed another waitress out of jail after that waitress hit her asshole boyfriend with a car. And now Lisa has set up an impromptu car wash in the restaurant parking lot to raise money for this waitress to cover legal fees, help her get away from her shitty boyfriend, etc. So we just see this woman, Lisa, dealing with a lot already. But then shit really hits the fan when Cubby, the incompetent owner of the restaurant, he shows up unannounced. Lisa has to lie about what the car wash money is for. Lisa and Cubby get into an argument. He fires her. It makes the other waitresses really upset because they love Lisa. And that evening, after Lisa has left the restaurant, Macy and Danielle sabotage the dinner service as a form of protest. And then they also end up getting fired. And then sometime in the near future, at the end of the film, we see Lisa interview for a manager position at the Man Cave, which is a chain of restaurants with a concept similar to Double Whammies. And while she's there, she runs into Macy and Danielle, who have been fired from Double Whammies and are auditioning, that's the word they use, auditioning for a waitress position at the Man Cave. And the film ends with the three of them sitting on a rooftop together, contemplating their uncertain futures, and after needing to suppress their rage for so long, they scream together into the distance.
That's a great synopsis of the ending, especially. The ending really makes this movie.
It's a really good ending. And I feel like as I was coming up with the synopsis, it is hard to explain because it's just life happening over the course of a day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the movie is documentary-like in its filming techniques, and its dialogue is very natural. I often wonder if parts of it were improvised. So me just kind of explaining things as they happen in this movie is not doing it justice, because when you watch it, you really do feel the cumulative effect of all of the stuff that these women are dealing with throughout the day, and you really do get to know their characters and come to love them and root for them. But enough of me talking. Maggie, this was your first time watching this movie. I was the one who picked it. I'm very excited to hear what your origin story is, because that origin story is so fresh.
Yeah, super fresh. I had not seen this, nor had I heard of it. And I have had a very busy last few weeks. I had started it a few times and then would get distracted and start doing something else. I was like, damn it. Okay. So finally, literally just last night, I watched it in its entirety. I had seen maybe the first 20 minutes several times. And I could tell that I was going to like it. I did like it. I actually watched this one with TJ.
Ooh.
I usually watch them on my own. We watched this one together and we both really enjoyed it. And there's a lot of humor. And I mean, the title is Support the Girls. And you get to see women loving each other and supporting each other. And that's wonderful. What really stuck out to me is in one of the very early scenes, it's actually the conversation between Lisa and Danielle, where Danielle shows up and is like, my kid is sick. I need help. And just their conversation in the entryway, I'm watching and I'm like, I feel like I'm just eavesdropping on an actual conversation. So I agree entirely. I had the sense that there was a lot of improvisation throughout this film on the actors' parts, but maybe not. I mean, clearly they're all very talented actors, so, and that's how it's supposed to feel when you watch a movie, right? But I feel like it is not uncommon to be watching a movie, and at least at some point in the film, for me anyway, I can imagine the characters reading what they're saying off of a script. And I never get that sense in this entire movie. It always feels very natural and real and like this beautiful example of what it means to care for each other as women.
I agree with all of that. I'm so glad that you liked this movie. So there is a part of me that's eagerly awaiting the day we strongly disagree on a film, just because we haven't had that day yet. And I think it'll be interesting and perhaps stressful. But alas, I am glad that you liked this film. I first watched this movie not long after it was released. I didn't see it in theaters, but it must have popped up on streaming pretty soon after, as a lot of smaller movies do. Because I know that the first time I watched it, I was still working at the Omaha Henry Dorley Zoo, which was the first job I had I started working there when I was 16, and I worked there for 5 years. It was a very formative experience. I was not working in food service, but I was working in guest services. I immediately just kind of am gravitating towards this portrayal of women working in a service industry because of that experience. But the reason I was especially taken by this movie is that in the opening scene, when we first meet Lisa and she's just crying in her car before she goes into the shift, I don't even know how many times I did that as a teenage girl waiting to go into the Henry Dorley Zoo, which, for those who don't know, is in Omaha, Nebraska. It's the #1 tourist attraction in the state. It's one of the most visited zoos in the country, and it's often one of the top ranked zoos in the country as well. It is a quite nice zoo. So I was dealing with a lot of people every day, and sometimes it was really stressful. And so I immediately just fell in love with the movie with regards to just seeing this woman crying in her car. Because I was like, oh, I do that. Other people do that? Yes, duh, obviously.
You don't know that when you're
right,
though.
Right.
Yeah, it's late stage capitalism. We are all crying in our cars.
And then I rewatched it again last week, and I was PMSing, so I was feeling weepy in general. And so I sort of just watched this entire movie with a lump in my throat. I felt on the verge of tears practically every single scene. Which is all to say, I think this movie is wonderful. I think Regina Hall's performance in this movie is so spectacular. I think she is pulling off something that is actually incredibly challenging, because this tenet of her character is that she is optimistic and she is trying to do her best and she is trying to take care of her employees. When you have a character like that, it's possible for them to become this cartoon version of themselves where it's just like, I represent the power of optimism and why you should always see the best in things. And that's not what she's doing. You see in her face, you see her be frustrated and pissed off and sad and also hopeful and also believe in her ability to try. I love her in this movie so much. I really think this movie is wonderful. I think it's very sincere. I think it's not trying to make some big capital S statement about what it's like to be a woman or something. It doesn't feel proud of itself or self-congratulatory in any way. And I'm really glad that we get to talk about it. A main heading in my notes that I took while watching this movie reads, I love these women and how much they love each other. And these women depicted in this film, they matter to me on both a gendered level and a class/labor level. The fact that they love each other so much matters to me in both this gendered way and in this labor way. And obviously those two things are inextricable. But like I mentioned, I worked a guest services job for 5 years. I would say that my full-time job now qualifies as a guest services job. It is a art I am very well versed in. But when you're working a minimum wage guest services job, I encountered some of the worst customers I have ever met in my life. I also encountered some very kind folks. I had some supervisors who I literally, if I ever saw them again, I would want to hit them with my car. And I had some supervisors who I still remember very, very fondly. And so seeing how much these characters love each other in these ways that are so regular, of like, oh, you need a babysitter? I'm going to help you find a babysitter. And then later, when Lisa sees Danielle on the phone after her son has been picked up by the babysitter, Lisa doesn't know what Danielle's saying, but she wonders if there's something wrong with her son, and she asks her if her son is okay. That's just the most regular, wonderful way of loving someone, right? And so it's like the way you survive these shitty jobs where you are required to take care of shitty customers and give them what they want is you're just thrown together on random shifts with random people, and you just suddenly, it almost seems out of nowhere, become deeply invested in each other's lives. And you just live for these late afternoon moments where you get to just take a breath and shoot the shit. And sometimes, you know, someone leaves and you never see them again. And then sometimes you become lifelong friends with these people that you work with. And so just to see a movie that understands that camaraderie so well and can showcase its necessity without making it twee and cutesy or corny, it just strikes this very specific chord in my soul. And as much as this movie is about sexism, misogyny, racism, classism as the pervasive atmosphere of living, I think this movie is also just as much about how much these women just fucking love each other. And I know I've already said that 50 times, but it can't be overstated.
Yeah, I've worked in some customer service positions too. I worked in like a full service shoe department for three or so years. I did work at a smoothie shop for 3 weeks. I cannot work in food service. I can barely use a fucking microwave. But really what this movie made me think about in terms of the workplace environment and women supporting women is the time I spent working for child protection. When I worked for the Department of Social Services, people tend to quit in batches and then start in batches. And oftentimes when you're starting out, you're like straight out of college. So we were all in our mid-20s. Some of us were a little younger, some of us were a little older, but like average age, about 25. And we cried together in our cars. We cried together under our desks. We cried in the parking lot when we were taking smoke breaks. I love that scene where Lisa goes outside by herself and she's on the phone with the cable company or whatever because they need to get the cable turned back on in order to watch a fight for the fight night that they're supposed to like that they're hosting at the restaurant that night. And we get this scene of her just sitting outside alone. She hangs up the phone. They hang up on her and she's staring at the sky. And these moments of solitude between the absolute fucking wildness of being working class, honestly, and working in any kind of position where you are expected to please other people, which is arguably, if you are working class, you are working in a position where your entire job is to please other people in some way, in some fashion, or to care for others. And it made me think about the levels of caretaking that women are often subjected to that are easy to overlook. So, for example, working for child protection, obviously it was our job to literally keep children alive, to keep them safe. We're all working together to make these decisions. And it's almost all women, pretty much everyone in the office, from supervisors to caseworkers. And meanwhile, in the backdrop of this, many of us were experiencing our own forms of domestic violence and caring for our own children and figuring out also how to care for each other in addition to our entire job, which is caring for other people. So the layers in which we are expected to nurture, but I don't want it to be misconstrued that I am diminishing the importance of nurturing the people around you. And yes, it's a gendered term and it's often weaponized against us, which is why I feel hesitant to use it so like casually without giving some sort of explanation. But I'm not weaponizing it here. I'm just saying it's important to care for other people and in whatever way that you know how to do that. I would say when I think of the word nurturing, I think of the way that Lisa cares for others, right? Oh, you need a babysitter? I'm going to find a babysitter for you. You need me to tell that dude in the corner to get the fuck out of the restaurant because he's being disrespectful? I'm going to tell him to get the fuck out of the restaurant. And I'm going to make sure that you understand that it isn't okay and that you're comfortable, right, in this space. And then I think about the character Danielle. How does she care for others? Well, first of all, like we see her being a mother. We know that she's a mother, but she goes and flirts with that weird dude.
So good.
in order to get, was it the sound system?
Yeah. Do you want me to explain it?
Yeah.
The restaurant is in this sort of strip mall type location, I guess, or business park. And Lisa comments that she knows the managers at all the other businesses. And they're throwing this car wash to raise money for a waitress who needs money to cover her legal fees. And Lisa really wants some speakers to play music to attract people to use this car wash. And so she asks Danielle very politely, it's honestly so sweet, if Danielle would be willing to go with her to the sound place to flirt with the guy, because she knows the guy who the movie depicts him as a total loser and creep. Like, that's not ever questioned. Mm-hmm. And she asked Danielle to flirt with him to see if he would lend sound equipment for free. And Danielle's like, okay. Mm-hmm. And it's very funny, but not in a way where we're laughing at violence against women.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Something that she does, that Danielle says to the weird creep when he makes this weird comment. He's like, oh, don't worry. I won't touch you in any way that's not consensual or something mm-hmm. like that. And she just looks at him and said, I will kill you. So the way that Danielle nurtures is, it's different. I guess it's sort of service based. Mm-hmm. And like, I'm going to do this for you. Mm-hmm. Am I going to be your shoulder to cry on? Maybe. Mm-hmm. But she's more likely, I think, to tell the person who made you cry to shut the fuck up, which is also a kind of care. And we need people like that. I am not, well, I can be that person on occasion, but I feel like I have my friend Danny, if you're listening to this, my friend Danny is like, and Teresa. Actually, I surround myself with women who are the types that are like, I will tell the other person to shut the fuck up.
And we even see Danielle become protective of Lisa near the end of the movie, which we learn that Cubby has threatened to fire Lisa multiple times. And at one point when he tells Lisa, he's like, I am this close to firing you. She's like, well, I know how to do the paperwork and you don't, or whatever, because he's incompetent. Mm-hmm. And Danielle tells Lisa, Cubby told me to fill out this paperwork so he could fire you. And we just see that Danielle wrote in giant Sharpie all over the paper, fuck that. And then Lisa, in response, is like, you don't want to mess with him like that today. It's my time to go. I have to go. And so it's funny and it's poignant. And I hadn't thought about just all the different ways of caring that take place in this movie. And I think another layer is the character of Macy, who is this very bubbly, upbeat. She has a confetti torch thing that she keeps blowing everywhere. Mm-hmm. And it would be really easy to lean into that character as a cartoon as well, of just this overly eager type of person. But you get the sense that she is leaning into this hyper positivity, because if she doesn't, she's probably just gonna like shut down. And so these characters feel like people you could just meet anywhere, but they also still feel incredibly distinct and dynamic at the same time, which I think is really impressive.
And perhaps this is true for any character ever in any film ever, but I think particularly, and you spoke to this at the beginning, it would be so easy for these characters to be flattened by the expectations of what they're meant to represent, right? Optimism, nurturing, protective, mm-hmm. right? But instead they feel so real and so true. Mm-hmm. But it is wild to me that Macy's character is able to hold all of the depth that she does. Mm-hmm. She truly is just a cheerleader type,
right?
Is what
that's kind of word.
Yeah, but she's incredibly aware of what's going on. Mm-hmm. And the optimism is in response to what's going on. It's not this oblivious mm-hmm. sort of reaction that she's just learned to have to the world because she doesn't understand mm-hmm. it. She's responding directly to the events that are happening.
Mm-hmm. That's another thing I really admire about this movie, and that I don't think I fully comprehended until watching it again recently, was how the movie avoids stereotypes regarding women being naive about the state of the world. There are a lot of examples of working class characters being depicted as dumb or clueless. There are plenty of depictions of a woman being depicted as dumb and clueless, especially if she is sexually desirable by men. And this movie goes out of its way to shut down any of that bullshit. There's a very early scene in the movie where Lisa is doing a training session with a bunch of new hires, and she's explaining how stuff works, and one of the girls asks, "Do we get grabbed?" That's exactly how she phrased it. And Lisa is standing there, and Macy is also standing there. And I think Macy comments that it doesn't happen very often, and she sort of goes through her strategies for dealing with customers. And again, she's being very optimistic about it, but you know that optimism is bred from someone has grabbed her in the past, and here's how she had to deal with it.
Right.
And Lisa says that she has a zero tolerance policy for sexual assault. She uses the phrase sexual assault, which really stood out to me. It's like being groped one time is sexual assault. And that if that happens, then you let her know, and that person will not be allowed to stay in the restaurant. And I just really appreciated, kind of similar to Plan B with the blowjob in the park scene, in that it's showing how aware these girls and women are of the ways in which the world exploits them. And that this sort of attitude the film has about the girls' intelligence and self-awareness. They understand the kind of place they are working in, but the film doesn't pin any blame on them for the misogyny or violence that they experience, even though they have decided to work there. It's operating, I think, in this very complicated level. And that especially becomes clear to me at the end of the movie when Lisa interviews for a job at the man cave, and the woman she is interviewing with makes a comment about, we have a really clear handbook full of protocol because, you know, the girls are really sweet, but lots of times they don't have a lot going on up there. The implication being that they're stupid and don't know any better and don't understand the type of environment they're in. Mm-hmm. And that's just not fucking true.
The interviewer that's talking to Lisa for this job at this other place, a corporate chain, what was really interesting to me is that she also referred to herself as class of 07, as somebody who had worked for the chain. And so the misogyny is blatantly internalized, I think, though, in a smart way in that moment, to say, here's this woman, now she's in this leadership role, talking about how these other women are stupid. Meanwhile, she was one of those women. It's a really great example of how the patriarchy operates, right? We'll give you just enough power, which is to say, we'll give you some power over other people. And it makes you believe in this, it's a sort of like false autonomy, a false sense of autonomy, when really you're not the fucking one calling the shots here, right?
Something else I noticed about that scene was that the person who goes into the interview room before Lisa and the person who goes in after her are both men. And it's not commented upon in any way. It's kind of a blink and you miss it moment. But I was like, interesting. Because we also see, after Lisa has been fired and she was working the day shift, we see the manager of the dinner shift interact with the girls. And he's a fucking asshole. And it's obvious that he does not provide any level of compassion or safety the way that Lisa does. And it just became so clear to me that, and this is me totally projecting onto Lisa's character, but I'm like, this woman must feel some sort of pull to these types of restaurants because she knows that she is going to provide something for these girls that is not a given. That is so much to take on. But you see, after, despite working for this shitty boss in an environment that was clearly very dysfunctional, she is willing to situate herself in a similar environment again because she knows what matters most is taking care of these girls.
That made me think about, though, as well, the fact that, yes, there were men that were interviewing before and after her. And also the woman that is the interviewer is a white woman with long blonde hair. And this film also does a good job at portraying how covert racialized violence happens in a space where there is already emblazoned misogynistic, I don't know what the word is on that I'm looking for, when there's just blatant misogyny, such blatant misogyny. Because one of the issues that they have is their asshole fucking owner will only allow one or two, like he gives an actual amount of how many black women can be working a shift.
It's one.
It's just one.
Because when Danielle shows up and needs a babysitter for her son, Lisa makes a comment that, well, Nika's off today. Let's text Nika. And Danielle's like, yeah, Nika's not working today because Cubby only allows one black girl on any shift. And then later when Lisa and Cubby are having an argument, Lisa brings that up. She's like, the girls notice this. And then he goes out of the way to defend himself and like, we're not breaking any law and it's a proven guideline that it's better for business or some fucking bullshit.
So the other thing I wanted to say is going back to Marin's point about how it's not a given that the managers are actually going to give a shit about the women is, yes, we have this police presence in the restaurant, but for one, they aren't always there, and two, they're just not as present, or their presence isn't as astute as Lisa's recognition of when something is happening and some kind of intervention needs to take place, right? At the end of the day, they're just there to drink beer and look at boobs.
Right.
And so the one other person that I would say is truly protecting the women is Bobo. Bobo is, and I don't think they ever give her a specific identity. So I'm just going to use the term more masculine lesbian character. It's obvious that this is sort of the archetype that she's playing, and she's great. And she comes to the girls' defense.
Bobo is played by famous lesbian comedian Leah DeLaria. I just love Bobo. But you said earlier that you felt like Bobo was the only other one who is protecting these girls aside from Lisa. So what specifically stands out to you?
Technically, she's there for the same reason as the men, but what is the difference? I feel as though she's also kind of there as protection for these women, because sure, she comes and flirts with them and she wants to drink beer and watch fucking fights on the big screen televisions, okay? So yes, she is there for the same reason that the men are. However, she also knows that these women are human beings and should be treated as such. So she's not just there to stare at them. She's also having conversations with them. She knows who they are. They know who she is, right? And I would say also, and speaking of Bobo, it's bringing to mind the professor, who is like this elderly man who later we found out Macy is actually dating. And he's a regular. He comes in all the time. And he is an elderly man. And Macy is 20-something. And Macy really likes him. And she's like, he's a sweet man. He treats me well. This old dude, the professor, he's also there for the same reason, right? But he now knows that Macy is a human. He's actually having a conversation with her. I think that those characters work really well to show who is really caring for who. I feel like the kind of men who frequent a place like that want to believe that they protect women, and they don't.
I agree with all of that entirely, because we're just talking about side characters. I just want to talk about a very small side moment, which is at one point in the film, the waitresses alert Lisa that a different waitress whose shift is supposed to start later has gotten a giant tattoo on her side of Steph Curry, the basketball player. And I guess the restaurant has a strict no tattoos visible policy. And so Lisa meets up with this waitress, I believe her name is Krista, at one of the nearby businesses. And they're at this smoothie place and they're talking. And Lisa's like, I think I have to fire you. I'm really sorry. And we know at this point what a dick Cubby is. We know that Lisa, while Lisa holds some power, she is ultimately beholden to him. Mm-hmm. And so there are only so many risks she can take for these girls before her own livelihood is put at stake. And Lisa sees these heart stickers on the counter at the smoothie restaurant. And she just is like, oh, I love those. Can I have some? She asks the cashier. And she takes them. And then the scene continues. And then eventually, a little bit later, we see her back in the restaurant. And she's just putting up these pink heart stickers in random places. And it just made me think about this necessary notion that there must always be something worth caring about. Even if it is as small as a cheap sticker that you just put on the door to brighten up this shitty restaurant. Mm-hmm. And I love that moment so much. And then after Lisa has been fired and left, we see a conversation that the dinner manager is having with Cubby. And as he's talking, he's just picking the sticker off the door frame and throwing it in the trash. Mm-hmm. And it's just the little details like that in this movie that make me love it so much.
I also love that scene. I'm glad that you brought that up. And I talk about those in my intertextuality. Should I just talk about it now?
Yeah.
I could.
Yeah.
Okay, so my intertextuality for this week is Joy Castro's book of essays. Some of them are micro essays or even like prose poems. There's one in particular, it's called Grip. It's just a few paragraphs, like 6 or 7 paragraphs. And what made me think about this essay is when we finally see Lisa's home, we get this shot of her sitting in her living room and we can see how small her home is. Like it's a little apartment. And there's her TV and then we get the wall in the background. And I don't remember if it's a painting or a print, but there's one large square frame hanging on the wall. And on the other side of the wall, you can see the shape of where either that frame was hung previously or a different one that was exactly the same size. Either way, there's like an outline mark of it where it's no longer there. And in its place are these three smaller frames with little prints or paintings inside of them. And it made me think about a couple things. One, it made me think about she has taken the time to make her home a home, right? To put up these paintings but the outline of whatever frame is no longer there. Either it's been moved or that one, it used to match the other one and it's since fallen and she's had to replace it. That just stuck with me, right? Because she is so worried about the women that she works with, that work for her technically, that she takes the time to put these up on the wall, just like she takes the time to put the hearts up around the restaurant. But at no point does she have time to paint that wall, right? Or to repair the frame that maybe had fallen down, or to, in other ways, hide the past of what used to be on the wall. Okay. I really thought a lot about that. Like it was really,
I didn't even notice this. So I'm very glad you brought it to my attention though.
And so it made me think of this essay. The essay is called Grip. The first line's, over the crib in the tiny apartment, there hung a bullet-holed paper target, the size and dark shape of a man. So she went to the shooting range and practiced shooting at this target. There ended up being 36 bullet holes, and she's a great shot, right? And she describes how it ended up being hung over the crib because the walls were just full of so many other things, right? So there was just nowhere else to put it. But then towards the end, and I'm just going to read this last part here. When I was 21, my son slept under the outline of what I could do, a death I could hold in my hands. At the time, I'd have denied its locale any meaning, called its placement coincidence, pointing to walls crowded with other kinds of dreams. But that dark, torn thing did hang there, its lower edge obscured behind the wooden slats, the flannel duck, the stuffed white bear. It hung there like a promise, like a headboard, like a no, like a terrible poem, like these lines I will never show you, shielding you from the fear I carry, like a sort of oath I swore over your quiet sleep.
That essay is so good. I remember reading that in a class we took together. I forgot how good that essay was.
Joy Castro is amazing. When I saw the scene where Lisa was in her apartment and I see this outline of a frame that used to be there that is no longer there, and then thinking about the hearts that she put up around the restaurant, I really feel like Lisa's hearts are functioning in much the same way as this bullet-filled outline of a man hanging over Joy Castro's child's crib. But the difference is in the kind of safety that it's promising, right? In the essay, the safety is literally survival, which when you have an infant, you have to keep them alive. But as you get older and you move into the world, there are other kinds of living that need to be done, and you need to be kept safe in other ways. And that's what Lisa is doing for her employees when she puts these hearts up. And this sounds, I feel like it sounds cliche, but I feel like the sense of safety that Lisa is offering her employees is the space to experience some kind of softness, which is not offered by their clientele, nor by the other managers, nor by the world at all. I felt like those hearts were a really smart way to have a conversation about the kind of protection that Lisa was willing and attempted and did provide for these women that she cared about.
That was a great reading and synthesis. And I don't want to spoil it by adding my own babble on top of it. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
Okay.
I guess if you want to go there, the thing hanging over all of our praise for this movie and all of our appreciation towards this movie is the very compelling fact that this film was written and directed by a man. When the opening credits of this movie first roll, it's just this montage of cars on the interstate with the actors' names appearing on screen. And then at the end, it says written and directed by Andrew Bujalski, and it's this bright neon font. You can't really miss it. There was this part of me that wondered if that naming wasn't there at the very beginning of the movie, and if I didn't have any prior knowledge about this movie and I just watched it, would I assume it was directed and written by a woman? And I can never know.
I wonder if my inclination that so much of this movie was improvised is in part, right, my own bias, thinking there's no way a man could write this kind of dialogue that flows so naturally. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, like I can't say. Mm-hmm. And that isn't to say that I don't think men can direct movies in a way that is compelling. Obviously, here's a great example of that. But here's the thing. Like, men exist. I love men. I do. I love a lot of men. And if you are a man, you have this privilege, and that's great. I think that everybody should have this privilege, right? That would be wonderful. But if you already have it and you can use it to make films that are going to matter and that are going to represent these experiences that are so meaningful for other people to watch, right? That are not you, that do not look like you, that do not have your particular set of circumstances. Fucking props to you then, you know?
I have a couple thoughts, because the more I dwell on it, and I feel weird saying this, and I could execrate why I feel weird saying this, but I don't think we have time to do that right now. The more I dwell on it, the more meaningful it becomes to me that this movie was written and directed by a man. And there are a couple reasons for that. I think sometimes I watch a movie, or I read a book, or I watch a TV show that you can tell it is trying very hard to be feminist with a capital F. And oftentimes what that involves is this fixation with female suffering, where the world that has been created is only able to conceive being a woman as this prolonged state of agony. And I've seen male directors do this. I've seen female directors do this. Mm-hmm. I think at this point in time, the powers that be that are funding movies and books, they want to exploit oftentimes those types of narratives to make money. And I understand the idea that by portraying these really horrible real things that happen to women, we're spreading awareness on things and helping people realize about the ills of the world, and I understand the place for that. But being a woman is not a prolonged state of suffering. Just like working a working class job is not a prolonged state of suffering, because you are uniting with these other workers, you are uniting with these other women in order to survive. And so I think it goes back to the camaraderie that I mentioned at the very beginning of the episode. The fact that that is there, and that this man is able to conceive of womanhood as just this space. I know that word gets overused, but it's just this space where things are happening and it's normal. Because let's face it, sexism is a normal part of a woman's everyday life. Normal in the sense that we are used to it. We have just figured out how to navigate it. But that's not the only thing that these women are navigating. Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier that moment when Lisa goes out behind the restaurant and she's trying to talk to the cable company, and after she gets off the phone, she just sits on the curb. I love that moment so much. She's sitting on the curb and she closes her eyes, and the camera's kind of above her, and you can just see the sunlight hitting her face. And what happens next is that this bird is flying by and making sound. And she starts cawing at the bird and kind of laughing. And because this movie is very comedic in a lot of places, I could see a director or a writer who would take it one step further and have this moment of peace for Lisa be disrupted because the bird shits on her shoe or starts pecking at her or something. But that doesn't happen. The bird is flying and cawing, and Lisa is cawing and feeling the sun on her face, and she's just taking 10 seconds for herself. And the movie gives her all of that. It gives her this window of bliss. And I love that it gives that to her uninterrupted. It matters a lot to me. Before I go further, because this is where my intertextuality comes in, do you have a response to what I just said?
Yes. I want to add that this idea of being a woman is not a state of prolonged suffering. And I know that, and you know that. And yes, men and women alike will sometimes represent it as if that's all there is. This movie does a good idea of not doing that. Sorry, I'm just repeating you as I'm getting to my thought. I am surprised, though, when a man can conceive of that. And I think I would like to get to a point where that is actually my expectation, rather than allowing myself to be surprised, because in this backwards way, that's perpetuating this idea that men aren't capable of conceiving of what women experience. Because honestly, I feel like I very well can conceive of what men experience, because I've been fucking paying attention my whole life to what men are experiencing. I have been taught to always be attuned to what men are experiencing. Right. And it goes beyond gender. Right. And I hope that one day this conversation will move beyond gender. And maybe the way to do that is to have the conversation move beyond gender right now. There are plenty of feminist philosophers that have made that argument. I don't know. The binary is so apparent. And to try to just completely eschew it from our language is going to leave out the people that most need to be a part of the conversation, which is the people who cannot see beyond it, right? Some days I think that's true, some days I don't. But at the end of the day, right now, in this moment, men are totally capable of understanding what women experience. And so I shouldn't be surprised that a man was able to write and direct a film that exemplified so well what it might look like for women to work in a place called the fucking man cave. That's all.
I agree with that 100%. And watching this movie made me think of a different movie that I watched a while ago, totally independent of this podcast. I think I watched it before we even started recording episodes for this podcast. And that film is called Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, which is from 1974, and it was directed by Martin Scorsese. It was one of his earliest films. So before he had established himself as this short Italian fella who makes movies about lots of mob violence, he directed this road coming-of-age movie about this middle-aged woman whose husband dies really suddenly. And she suddenly realizes that now that her husband is dead, I can maybe figure out who I am. She lives in New Mexico. She's got this 12-year-old kid, boy. She's like, I want to move back to Monterey, California. And I want to try to be a singer, because that was always her dream when she was a child. And she got married and she became a housewife. And from the 5 minutes we see her husband at the very beginning of the movie, we know he's not a good guy. And so it's this question of what happens when a woman comes of age in her 40s, or re-comes of age in her 40s. We see her on the road. We see her taking these various jobs to make money. And she ends up in this Arizona town, and she works as a waitress. And it's just a movie about this woman trying to get her life together, trying to take care of her son, meeting other women, meeting other men. And it's this very beautiful character study of just this woman in flux. And like this movie, it's very not showy in its film techniques, etc. And I was reminded of it while rewatching Support the Girls, because what struck me about both movies is how acutely they understand the ways in which men, sometimes well-meaning men, sometimes without realizing it, are just burdens to women in the most everyday ways.
Mm-hmm.
And it is complicated to assume that because a person makes a piece of art with this specific message, then therefore that reflects their character in like a 1-to-1 ratio. I know it's more complicated than that. But what I would like to believe is that movies like Support the Girls, movies like Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, are reflective of men who have contemplated and interrogated what masculinity is, what masculinity accomplishes, what masculinity inflicts and have interrogated their involvement in that and have made art that is conversing with that. That's what I want to believe. Can we know for sure? I don't know. But I did read a couple interviews with that Andrew Bujalski gave, and he talked a lot about going to these types of restaurants, Hooters types. He visited them all across the country and just spent time in them.
Wow.
To observe the other patrons, to observe the people who were working there, to just observe the atmosphere. It wasn't like he just woke up one day and is like, I want to make a movie where all the actresses on my set get to walk around in low-cut shirts all day. Mm-hmm. He was really fascinated in the way these restaurants exist in American culture and nowhere else, and all the layers that are happening in them. And he seems to have done his due diligence. Mm-hmm. He cares about this culture that we have cultivated. He cares about what this culture inflicts and wanted to make a movie about it. And I think that's great, ultimately.
No, I totally agree. And I didn't know that. And thinking about him going to these restaurants, observing the clientele, I wonder if we were to look at this movie as an exploration of masculinity in as much as it is an example of the experience of being a woman in these spaces that were specifically built for heterosexual men. How does that change my understanding of it and the ways in which maybe it further deepens my interpretations?
Mm-hmm. I will say, a scene where I felt particularly implicated was that whole road rage sequence. I don't remember why Lisa and Cubby are in the car together. But, I think because Cubby finds out about the car wash and he assumes the money is for the restaurant, even though it's actually not. And he's like, we're going to the bank. We're putting this money in the bank account or whatever. And so he's driving his truck and Lisa's in the passenger seat and they're arguing about a variety of things, and they're on the highway and some guy cuts Cubby off and Cubby gets pissed because someone was driving poorly, and instead of just letting it go, he proceeds to follow the car that cut him off all the way to the person's house. And Lisa is very upset. She's like, this is stupid. This is dangerous. I am on the clock. There is a restaurant that I'm supposed to be running right now. So they follow this guy to his house. Cubby gets out of the car, goes to confront the driver who cut him off. And before he can even say anything, the other driver just punches him in the dick. And I laughed. Okay? I laughed because Cubby is an asshole. Do I condone violence? No. But was it kind of satisfying to see him get punched in the dick? It was. For me personally. Mm-hmm. It was. And so I laughed. And then the camera moves to Lisa. And Lisa just breaks down crying. And in that moment, I was like, to this woman who is under so much stress, is dealing with so much stuff, Cubby getting punched in the dick is not funny because it's just one more thing that she has to... It's one more piece of bullshit that she has to be privy to that she shouldn't have to be privy to. Mm-hmm. And also... this has the potential to escalate to further violence. We don't know if this guy has a gun in his trunk. These things can escalate very quickly. She is stressed and she is scared. And so the way that scene flips the comedy of it on its head, I would say, to go back to your point of seeing this movie as a kind of interrogation of masculinity as well. To me, that moment really crystallizes that.
I'm glad you brought up that scene. I had forgot about that. And yeah, I think that it is so easy to, like, when we see masculinity being weaponized back against those wielding the violence of masculinity, it is easy to be like, okay, well, yeah, this is what you fucking asked for. Mm-hmm. You're getting what you fucking asked for, dick. But the problem is, as long as men are still trying to kill each other, they are going to continue trying to kill us. I'm glad you brought up that scene because I hadn't really thought about that until you just said that. So thank you.
Thank you. Did you have anything else you wanted to add? before?
Not really. Just that the final scene is really good.
Oh, it's so good.
It's really good. They're on the roof and they're screaming and they're drinking a little bit. And if you have never had a moment like that in your life, come hang out. I am always up to find a roof to get drunk on and scream. There's nothing like it. Better than therapy. Go to therapy too.
It's a good ending because it is hopeful without absolving the situation of its shittiness.
And they are screaming.
And what prompts the screaming is they can hear some other girl crying in the parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
And Macy, being the optimistic sweetheart that she is, starts screaming, "Everything's gonna be okay," at this girl in the parking lot. And then they just start screaming. They're not even screaming words. Not at the girl who's crying in the parking lot, but into the ether. So now I just have one more. Actually, I guess I have two more questions to ask you. The first is, what does this movie make you want to tell your younger self?
It's less about what I'd want to tell her and more about how much I would like to go back to those moments when I was working in the Department of Social Services and we were all in our mid-20s and dealing with the most horrific shit in our work life and in our home lives. And I would live it all over again. I'm not saying that the things that happened were good and I just want to relive those. Obviously, if I could change in some way, but you can't. I'm just saying if I had an opportunity to live through it again, I would do it. Because like you said so well, even through all that shit, it wasn't just this case of prolonged suffering. Even though we were crying in the parking lot, we were fucking laughing our asses off too. We were just literally experiencing life together, figuring shit out. And that grit of living in spaces where there are just a bunch of women figuring it out, there's nothing like it. It's holy. It's a holy thing. So I guess I would just tell her, you're really fucking lucky.
I would also speak to my younger self in her Henry Doorly Zoo blue polo and khaki capris. That was my uniform. And I would tell her, I'm about to get so earnest. I would tell her that, you know that coworker you just met whose name is Xanadu? Hi, Xanadu. And how you think she's really cool and you love spending time with her at work and you're so glad that you get to work with her. I would tell her that however many years later, I don't even know how many years it's been, you would still talk to that person every single day. And it's true because I know I still use my Snapchat account. I know I'm too old for Snapchat, but Xanadu and I now live in Virginia. She still lives in Omaha. We're both free from Henry Doorly Zoo. And every day we just send each other a little Snapchat. So it's just like a picture of something funny or stupid or upsetting or boring that we're like witnessing in our day. The last time I saw her in person, because when I'm in Omaha, we always try to make an effort to see each other, she commented on that and she was like, I love that I just get to see a little snapshot of your day every day. Because that is what you want to share with the people you love, is just your everyday stuff. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I would have understood that when I was 16, but I do now. And so maybe I don't know if I'd want to tell her that though, because I don't want to spoil the recognition, that moment of realization. But I would just tell her to wait, and that it was not prolonged suffering, because you're going to meet this beautiful person who you're going to love forever because of it.
Sometimes it's hard to be like, what would you say to your younger self? Because what could I wouldn't have understood it. It wouldn't have mattered. I would have been like, okay, you fucking weirdo.
Yeah.
I don't feel lucky right now. I'm chain smoking in a parking lot, sobbing my fucking eyes out.
Yeah.
But, the older I get, the more I realize like how lucky I am to have had the opportunity to be alive, crying my fucking eyes out, chain smoking in a parking lot with other women who loved me. And to be here now to think back on it and understand the look. So many people don't get that. I've made it to 35 years old.
Yeah.
So.
Deep breath. I don't know. Everybody who is listening, thank you so much for listening. We would love it if you subscribe to the show on your podcast listening platform of choice and turn on post notifications. That way you won't ever miss a new episode.
Check this episode's show notes for additional information on the secondary text we referenced. You can follow the podcast on Instagram at Tell Me I'm Sorry and email us your own musings and questions at tellmeimsorry@gmail.com.
You can follow me on Letterboxd at Marin Harrington.
And you can follow me on Instagram at _Saint_Margaret.
I'm I'm just being narcissistic and super excited to say my name. Did you want to repeat that? Here, why don't you?
There's so many underscores. We just leave this part in. That's okay. It's _Saint_Margaret_ MARGARET. Anyway.
I'm Marin.
And I'm Maggie.
And you thought the episode was over, but it's not, because we believe in many things on this show, but we especially believe in epilogues, which means Maggie gets to reveal what movie we're watching next. So that is my other question for you, Maggie. What movie are we watching next?
The movie that we're watching next, it came out in either 2019 or 2020, I guess, maybe depending on where you live. Marin will tell us next week. She'll have the deets. And is written and directed by Claire Oakley, I believe is her name. And the movie is called Makeup.
I have never heard of this. And actually, not like the Starling Girl where I said I hadn't heard of it, but actually I had. I have genuinely never heard of this. I don't recognize that director's name.
I watched it like 4 years ago. I've been waiting to rewatch it. So that'll be fun.
Cool. That is Makeup. For those of you who want to be a square and do some homework and watch along. Or if you want to be punk and not do homework, that's cool too. Mm-hmm. Squares and punks are equally welcome here. Okay. Thank you so much. Bye.
Goodbye.